Jim. Welcome to Landscape Photography. How are you going?
I am very well, Grant. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Sitting here in Broken Hill in my motorhome. It's about 8:30 at night, and yeah, enjoying myself.
Is it dark outside, or do you have the you
Yeah,
got
no,
the
it's
curtains
it's
closed? Right.
dark. Sunset was
Okay.
about 2 hours ago. I did go out and do a
Right.
sunset shoot. Actually, I was having a look at some old mines.
Okay.
Yeah, so you've got the old sort of pit head with the wheel and all that sort of gear. So we'll
Coal
see how they
mines.
come out.
Yeah.
No,
Did you?
round
Do you think?
here, Broken Hill's all about silver, zinc, and a few other
Okay.
mines like bauxite and whatever, but mostly silver. That's the big thing here in Broken Hill.
Right.
Anyway,
Very
enough
good.
about my day. How's your day?
Yeah. Very good. Just work, but I've been working today. It's just a bog standard operation for me.
Fair enough. So let's talk about photography. That's why we're all here. And the listeners don't want to hear about work and they don't want to hear about my Broken Hill experiences. Maybe they do, I don't know. But let's talk about why you're a landscape photographer and what is it that keeps you being a landscape photographer?
So I started photography about 3 years ago. So it'll be 3 years either late this month or early next month. And it was a way for me to get out early morning. I'm up early anyway. I'm an early riser,
Yep.
early to bed, early up. And it was a way for me to get out, enjoy the coastline. So I'm based in Northumberland, which is in
Huh?
the northern east corner of England. It was a way to get out, see the coastline, see the sunrise, record it. And it's just gone from there, really. It was something that I'm sure everybody listening will know, it becomes a bit of an addiction, a bit of a drug. And once you
Definitely.
start, you get deeper and deeper. And I'm 3 years. That's it. And I keep saying I know very, in the grand scheme of things, I know very little about photography. So I've still got a long road ahead. I've got lots to learn. I'm picking up stuff all of the time. I get stuff from your podcast, from other podcasts, from YouTube videos, and I'm a prolific learner. I like
Yep.
to evolve and test things and try different things within photography. So yeah, I'm thoroughly enjoying it. And I've got, as I say, I've got a long road ahead, I think.
Yeah, fantastic. And where did it start? You said three or 4 years ago. What was it that kicked the bug off?
I I I exercised a lot, and I tore cartilage in one of my knees, and I couldn't really train the way that I once did. And there
Yeah.
was we were coming out of lockdown and all of that kind of stuff at the time. So it was, I think it was just a combination of things, and that was probably what started it. And I very quickly went down the route of getting knee deep and more. But I have a long time ago at college, I studied graphic design, so I've got a graphic design background, although I haven't
Okay.
used it for the end of a quarter of a century or maybe even a little bit longer. But
Yeah.
it's still there, and that artistic side is, I think, something that I can access via photography.
Yeah, sure. I guess also that graphic design background, you tend to learn tools like Photoshop, Illustrator, and so forth, and some of those common elements around color and light and contrast and all those sorts of things sort of stick with you and help you. Have you found that's helped you in your photography, particularly in the editing suite?
Not so much actually in the editing suite, because my graphic design days were long before I
Ah,
was
okay.
using a piece of software called Quark or
Yep, I
Quark. I
remember.
can't
Yeah,
actually.
Quack.
Yeah.
I
So,
remember
so that
Quack.
was before. That was even before PageMaker, which
That's
is,
right.
and
Yeah.
you're going back 20 odd years to get to PageMaker. So
Wow.
it was a long time ago. So it was, but the fundamentals, things like composition, things like color theory, things like,
Yeah, and they're the things that I guess I was
yeah.
really. Yeah.
And I do think, although I actually haven't really thought about it, but that probably does have a bearing on photography and how I compose shots and all of that kind of stuff. I've never put that together, Grant. So you've taught me something about myself I hadn't
Well, there
thought
you go.
about. But yeah, there you go.
Always looking to inspire and educate. Speaking of inspiration, where do you get your inspirations from? What is it that really deep down makes you say, yep, that's the shot?
Given where I live, I've got a growing passion over the last few years for the history of the region. So a lot of my shots will feature. You're talking about coal mines. We've got a big, sorry, silver mines. We've got a big coal mining heritage, and I haven't spent a lot of time around what very little is left of the coal mining history. But going back even further, we've got a lot of castles. We've got a lot of fortifications in Northumberland as a whole, and they'll
Yeah.
often form part of where I go, what I look for, how I compose shots if I can include things like that. I'm big on light. I do look for dramatic light a lot of the time, and we're on the East Coast, so we get the sunrise light, and it can be pretty spectacular this far north. It can be very dull, so we do get an awful lot of dull days, but when it happens, it can be really fantastic. Light's a big thing, and more so lately, I'm moving into trying to create or trying to tell a story within the image. So including maybe things like human elements or
Yeah.
animals or things like that. So I don't think I'll move too far into that to the point where I become documentary type photography. But I do think it brings a different aspect to some of the landscape stuff. It brings it alive and it gives it a bit of context and that sort of stuff. So they're the sort of things I look at within photography. And I do spend quite a bit of time, as I say, researching, learning. I've got quite a few photo books, and I get a lot from those as well. I get a lot of ideas and inspiration from those sorts of places as well.
Yeah. Cool. Cool. And are you a planner or a more spontaneous photographer? So do you go out with a preconceived idea about what it is that you're looking for, or do you just go, okay, I'm going to head in that direction and whatever comes?
It depends. Sometimes I am, and sometimes I'm not. Tonight, for example, the cogs are already going because we've got the potential of a bit of aurora activity tonight. So I'm already starting to think about where would I be, where would I be wanting to head. And I know the area very well now, so I've spent a lot of time in most of the places. So I know if it's going to be a sunrise or a sunset or aurora. I know where I ought to be going. I need to branch out a little bit, and this autumn winter I intend to go over to the Lake District a little bit more. I've got Glencoe booked in Scotland for middle of November, and for those sorts of things I will plan because I don't know the area, so I'll have a look at the Google Maps, have a look at other people's shots from those places, not necessarily to copy them, but just to get some ideas of what's available to me and that sort of thing. So I think where it's local, I can wake up at 4:30 in the morning, just jump in the car, and then once the wheels are turning, I'll decide where I'm going. But if I'm going further afield, I'll definitely plan it out.
Yeah, fair enough. And I guess things like Astro and Aurora and whatever, you got to have a bit of an idea about where you're going to set up. Nothing worse than turning up in the dark and stumbling around a field going, where's my shot?
Yeah, I have done that as well, and it tends not to work. It tends not to work. So yeah, where planning is required, I've got all the usual apps, and I'll spend time on those. So I'm watching Space Weather Live at the moment just to see whether anything's going to happen tonight or not. It could be tomorrow, so we'll see.
Yeah. You mentioned using experimentation, and I'm always interested in the side of experimentation and in having to deal with the failures that experimentation gives. The successes are great, but how do you deal with the inevitable failures of experimentation? Because you're going out trying something for the first time or trying something that you've not got a lot of experience with. that is always fraught with the danger that it's not going to work.
Yeah, honestly, I don't mind the failures. It, they come with the territory, right? So if you're gonna
Yeah.
try new things and you're gonna stretch yourself, you are gonna trip over your own shoelaces from time to time, and that's okay. I really don't mind that. Um, it's part of the learning experience, and I've gone out and I've tried something, I've failed, or only was it last week we had some big waves, and I nipped to the coast to try and catch the big waves, and I thought I'm going to be shooting at a fast shutter speed. I'll go handheld. Don't need a tripod. So I jumped out of the car without the tripod. Image was ever so soft, and it was the image that I wanted, but it was just a little bit too soft.
Yeah, sure.
So again, that's something that it's another thing to mark up, and I know what shutter speed I was at for the big waves. I know I can't handhold that now, and I'd have to go faster or have a tripod or whatever. So it is what it is, and you win some, you lose some, but that's part of the fun.
Yeah, I know what you mean, and in particular when you're looking at big wave photography, or any size wave really, but you put a big lens on, and that then means you're going to fatigue a lot quicker and so forth. And yeah, if you don't nail that shutter speed or get it up high enough, then yeah, you're going to end up with some softness. So yeah, I'm definitely an advocate. I'm lucky I bought a tripod. It's a waterproof tripod, but it actually comes with a detachable monopod leg. So I
Okay,
just have to detach the ball head,
that's a
put
good
that
idea.
on
Yeah,
top of the single leg. So if I'm doing wave or surf photography or anything like that with a 400 mil on, then so that it's not waving all over the place and I'm
yeah,
getting it where I want it, then you can just poke that down in the sand and away you go. It makes a massive
yeah.
difference.
Yeah, it's a good idea. It was something like that. I think would work pretty well for me. It's relatively infrequent that I'm out. We don't get that many sort of big
Sure.
swells. That maybe 3, 4 a year, something like that. So it's not that often, but I think something like that would really help me out actually.
Do you feel that you've developed a style yet, or is it still developing? And where are you in that stylistic journey?
It's a good question. That I don't feel like I have, but I was talking to a guy called Sean Gallagher, who is a National Geographic photographer, actually,
Yep.
and he pointed out to me that some of the things I mentioned earlier probably do constitute my style. So things like the dramatic light,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
historical items, things like that probably are my style. But
Yeah.
I don't acknowledge them as being my style. It's just
Okay.
that just happens to be what I take photographs of. But I don't know. So I honestly I don't know the answer. You tell me. But I I still think I've got a ways to go before I could say, right now I have a style and I go out to shoot in this particular way and I edit in a particular way. So I do beat myself up a little bit sometimes about edits because I, I would love to be able to edit consistently so that
Okay. Yep.
the images looked relatively consistent. But when I try and edit each image as an individual image,
Yeah.
and that means that they can look quite different based on what I see and what I want to create. But then that kind of contradicts the drive towards a specific style because
Yeah.
it's less consistent. So there's a bit of a paradox there, I think, to some.
Yeah.
But
I wouldn't beat yourself up about it because that difference between images, if they're the same sort of image and you're trying to get them to look the same, then yes, you should be able to get close by
yeah, yeah,
understanding what it is that you're tweaking. But I think what you said about not having a style, find interesting because I was a couple of episodes ago, I had Art Wolf on.
yeah.
It's
Old time.
70 odd, 73, I think. He's been a photographer for about 50 odd years.
Mhm.
and he doesn't think he has a style.
Right. Okay.
So it's really interesting. I think a lot of people do get hung up on it. And I ask the question more to find out how people think about their own work and
Mm.
where they see themselves in that stylistic journey. And are they still developing a style? Do they think they
Yeah.
have a style and so forth? Because
To some degree, I think it's probably like asking somebody, "What are your, what are your strengths, or what are you really good
yeah,
at?" You tend to be a little bit blind to those things, and maybe I have got a stand. If I looked at it objectively, if I looked at a handful of my shots or 2 dozen shots from a different, if I was somebody else looking in, I might actually see consistency, or I might see the style. But for me, because I'm processing, I'm with the image from start to finish,
yeah,
it doesn't feel as consistent for me. So maybe there's something in that. I'm not sure.
yeah. As I say, I wouldn't get too hung up about it. It's for some people, it's a big thing, and they process, and this consistency is what they're all about. But viva la difference as far as I'm concerned. It, if you can make them look good, regardless of whether they look all the same or they got the same
Yeah,
tonal range or whatever,
yeah,
it, that's the beauty, is that
yeah,
every image can be an individual polished gem that's completely and utterly unique to the next one.
yeah. And that for me, I'm not a professional. I do this as a hobby,
Yeah, sure.
and I'm taking the images for me, and I'm processing them the way I want them to be. That that's the enjoyment for me. I actually
Yeah.
get as much out of the processing as I do out of the capturing the shot,
Okay.
and that's evolved over the last 3 years. So at first, I'd whack a preset on it or a quick tweak, and I'd be done.
Yeah.
Whereas now, I can spend far too long just faffing around with an image with it 2 dozen masks on it and all. You can go too far, of course, but
Yeah.
that to me is part of the enjoyment. I think I'm learning to love that part of the process as much as the photography.
Yeah. And I mean, that is to me as important. I've spoken to a lot of people, and the way that they process really comes about because of whether or not that side of things is something they enjoy. And I know
Yeah,
there's some people that really don't enjoy it. They'd love to be able to put a card in their laptop or their machine and just say process and have the
yeah,
machine do it all for them. But to me, as you said, it is part of the enjoyment. It's part of the journey, and I liken it. They call it Lightroom for a reason. It's like the old darkroom process. A
mm,
photographer that wants to have total control over the process from woe to go needs to understand the process from where to go, because otherwise
yeah,
you're not going to have total control. And those elements of the creative process, for me anyway, and sounds like for you, just as important as the getting out and actually capturing the image in
yeah, definitely.
the magic box.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
Uh, what does success look like for you in your photography? When do you go, okay, that's it, I've nailed it?
I think when all of the elements come together, you talked about the planning, and we talked about the parts of my photography that are important to me. If I get a weekend where I can get up on a Saturday morning, I can travel out to whichever location on the promise of a decent sunrise. The sunrise happens, you get the shot that you think that is, that's going to be something worth spending a bit of time in Lightroom on, and you that to me, that buzz, or that part of the process is the bit that I think constitutes success. If I know I've captured it, I know I've got it, I can take it back, I can spend some time processing it and enjoy it. That's as much as as much as you can ask for. And as I say, because I'm not a professional photographer,
Yeah, yeah,
that the kind of financial side of it or the exposure side of it is less important to me. It's
yep,
just more about enjoying what I do and coming away with something that I feel kind of proud of or pleased with
yeah,
is,
sure.
is success for me.
Yeah, fantastic. What about, I guess, the balance of wanting to create something that's unique and original and the need to also stay true to the natural environment and the reality of the scene? You know, people sit on that artistic spectrum from, you know, the people that got to
Mm.
get it all right in camera and there's only one way of doing things, to somebody that's really free and will edit to the max and change skies, add stuff in, take stuff out, and all the rest of it. Where do you sit on the spectrum?
Uh, I'm certainly not. I don't shoot in JPEGs. I'm not at that end of the spectrum. But likewise, I am an absolute liability in Photoshop. So things like sky replacements are well off the table for me. I would, at the risk of dodging the question, I would say I sit probably left of centre on that line, and
Yeah,
I will edit things. I might enhance light, enhance colour. I might, but spot removal is as far as I would go in terms of manipulating an image. If there
yeah.
was some distractions in there, or if there was something that was particularly offensive in a bit of litter or something, I'll remove things like that.
Yep.
But I wouldn't do anything. I wouldn't add things into an image. I wouldn't change a sky. That sort of thing. I've played around with some of the tools. I've never posted anything that I've played around with. Actually, that's not strictly true. I did for a time when the generative fill was first introduced. I started dropping potatoes into images, giant monster potatoes and alien spaceship potatoes. And I put them a few of them on my story just because I thought it was funny. But I wouldn't ever do anything like that with an image. I've got nothing. I don't have an issue with it if that's what people
Yeah,
want to
no,
do. But
it's an
it's
artistic expression, and some people's
yeah,
artistic expression is to go wild and, yeah, even down the path of complete AI generation. And that's fine if they want to do it. I personally find it dull and boring to both look
well,
at
I'm the
and
same. Yeah,
also,
yeah. I'm the same. I don't see. I don't. I suppose it's a big philosophical debate, isn't it? But I don't class that as art. Even typing something into a
yeah,
computer, the computer's generating something. It's not art as such. But I've got no problem with it. But the thing that worries me is people trying to pass that stuff off
yeah,
as or being disingenuous about the fact that they have replaced a sky or they have dropped a boat into a lake that wasn't there or
yeah,
things like that. I just think that's a bit off, really. And people should just be honest and just say, look, this is a composite, or I've created this from
yeah,
scratch, or blah blah blah, and that's absolutely fine. There is a place for that. I'm sure some people will love to look at that stuff, but it's not for me.
yeah. I'm totally with you. That honesty of, if it is a composite, and I've posted composites and time blends and, you know,
Mhm.
all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff in the past. And the one thing that I am very proud of is the fact that I've always said this is a composite, and
Yeah,
this guy came from 3 hours later, but the same place, or
yeah,
might be in the same locality, but might be from a slightly
yeah.
different position. I actually did one down at Portland Bill there in the UK a few years ago,
Right.
and
Okay.
got the lighthouse, beautiful beams of the lighthouse
Yeah,
sweeping across the headland there, and a nice rock in the foreground, which I lit. And the Milky Way was rising at that time, but the Milky Way that's in the end shot was shot from the other side of the lighthouse, because the lighthouse light was just obliterating the ability to
yeah,
actually take a 30-second exposure and get the stars.
yeah. Yeah, I haven't even done composites because I don't know how to do them. Basically, I would probably, but I've told myself I downloaded a copy of Luminar Neo, and I do want to try focus stack. I've never even focus stacked,
Oh
so I
wow.
do that. That has a really straightforward focus stacking tool. So you basically just drag your 2 or 3 images into a box, let go, and it stacks the 3 images for you. So I have been telling myself that I'm gonna. I got myself a wider lens earlier in the year, and I do want to do some big foreground type shots, and obviously then I'm going to have to focus stack.
Yeah.
That'll probably be the limit of my technical ability, dropping it into a box, Grant, and then having the software do it for me. But
That's fair enough. You mentioned that it's a pastime more than anything for you, photography. Where does it fit in your life, and how do you balance the need? You said you get up early. That's great. Are you getting up early in preparation for going to work, or is it just something that always happens and you just
no, it's just that something that all. I'm a terrible sleeper. I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm an insomniac, but I don't think I'm kicking the backside off it, to be honest. So I'm up early anyway, and it fits in mostly on weekends, so Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah.
If there's a promise of a really strong sunrise on a weekday in spring, summer, and autumn, like late spring, summer, and early autumn, when I can get out, get to a location, and get back for work, I'll do that as well. And then usually on holidays or short trips with the family, that sort of thing, I'll always have the camera and make opportunities wherever I can.
No. Obviously, where you live has influenced what you're shooting. Do you feel that it's influenced how you shoot?
It's a good question. I think it has. It's definitely influenced how I see light and how I work with light, because because it's a sunrise destination. Oh, sorry, because it's on the East Coast and you get the sunrise. I work better with morning light because I've got more experience with it and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think it has, and it's probably influenced me more than I realize in terms of the fact that I bring into my shots now a lot of the history of the region and what's the remnants of the history. So what I'm really interested in is the pieces of history that are still left that allow present day to interact with it. So things like the castles is a great example, because some of them are obviously ruins, or some of them are gone entirely. It's just a site, but some of them are in great states of repair. Still, the homes to families or what have you, and the tourist attractions and things like that. So people have an attachment, emotional attachment to some of these places as well. You'll hear it. People will have proposed to their spouse there, or they might have got married there, or they'll know somebody who, that it was their grandfather's favorite place to go, or whatever it might be. And things like that do influence you, because you tend to treat things more subtly and try and create something out of it, and a bit of a story and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think it definitely has.
You brought storytelling back up. What is it that you're trying to communicate? I guess you've talked a little bit about the history. Is that the main story that you're trying to drive at?
I don't necessarily think it's the main story. I think what the things like the castles do, if you get the right light and the right location and the castle, and it I think it can transport people into a different time and place, because you look at that and it could be on some of the shots that I take, there's not another soul around. You can see a sweeping beach and a castle at sunrise. That could have been an image, or could have been something you would have seen. So you wouldn't have been able to take a photograph 500 years ago, but it could have been something that you would have seen 500 years ago. So there's a kind of romance to that, and I think people look at those things with a bit of like fairy tale about them. and I think that's quite nice. I like that.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things I'm interested in terms of most of the photographers that I speak to, is what their favourite spot is and why it's their favourite.
So for me, my favourite spot is Bamborough, which is
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
yeah. I've got one or two shots of that place. I don't think there's a spot around that castle that I haven't taken a photograph from. Granted, if I'm honest, I've milked it to within an inch of its life. I've got stuff from the air, from the
It's
beach.
a beautiful
I've got stuff
spot.
from the sea. It
I
is,
don't blame you. If
and
it was on my doorstep, I'd be at it every day.
yeah, and it's challenging to go back to the same spot. The castle itself, for those that aren't familiar with it, stands on about 150 foot of volcanic rock.
Mm.
That's where the castle's built, and in front of it, you've got some sand dunes, and then you've got a beach, which is probably, I don't know, it's maybe 3 mile stretch of beautiful sandy beach in front of it. And then you've got Bamborough Village, which sits behind the castle, is actually really small, so
Mm.
it doesn't obstruct the shot from pretty much any angle that you want to take it from. So looking at it objectively, there's a lot of places that you can go to take a shot, and there's a lot of different elements, natural elements that you can bring in. There's a lot of people surf on the beach, dog walkers, families picnicking, blah blah blah. So you can. There's 100 different things that you can do with it, and I find that quite in a positive way, quite challenging to go
Yeah.
back to somewhere and still look. I haven't been there hundreds of times and still look for a shot that I haven't yet taken. I find that quite stimulating.
Yeah, awesome. What's your most memorable experience with photography?
Most memorable experience, probably there's probably two. The first time I saw the aurora, which was the first time I saw it with my eyes rather than got a photograph of it, which was in Iceland. So we were there as a family, and we were actually sitting in the Hard Rock Cafe, and I was on beer number 3, I think. So obviously I couldn't drive the car. So I said to my wife, "There's the keys. We're off. Let's get in the car." So bless her, she had to drive in. And if you've ever driven in Iceland outside of Reykjavik, it is like pitch black. There's no street lights. It is black. And she'd never driven abroad. And bless her, she had to drive us out to the darkness so we could see the lights. So that was really memorable. And then the 10th of May in Northumberland, when we had the big aurora storm, I was on Holy Island, which is just up there, it's about 5 miles north of Bamborough. And there's another castle site there, and that aurora storm was just. I never thought in all my days I would ever see anything like that in Northumberland. It was. It literally. It was. So the image that I've got, the best image that I've got, was actually facing south, and there's almost like a cartwheel of aurora above the castle facing south. Now, I've never ever seen anything like that before, and it went on for. It started as soon as it got dark. It started, and it went on for. I left the island because there's a causeway to the island which floods, so you can only get on and off the island twice a day. So I left just before the tide was about to cover the causeway, and it was about, I don't know, maybe 2:30, something like that, and it was still going. It was unbelievable, and I don't think I'll ever see anything like that again. Which I was talking to one of the guys I was with, Ian, on the island that night, and in a way, it's ruined it for me because I know I'm never going to see anything like that again. So, like tonight, if there's an aurora, great, I'll go out and I'll shoot it. I know it's not going to be as good as that one. So you've got to, I've got to box that off and say that was an amazing experience. It was a once in a lifetime thing, and it won't happen again. But I've got to compartmentalize that, I think, and just enjoy it for what it is.
Cool. What about horror stories? Have you had any dramas out shooting?
Like everybody, I've dropped my camera on Bamborough Beach. Actually, luckily it was as the wave was going, it was receding, it was going out, and I dropped the camera and picked it straight back up. But probably the worst, the closest I've been to disaster was in a place called St Abs, which is just over the Scottish border.
Yep.
And I slid probably 30 foot down towards a cliff, which dropped down about 60 foot, like sheer drop of 60 foot. Wow. And I managed to wedge my foot, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 foot from the edge. That was pretty scary.
Wow. Well,
so
just lost your footing, or?
Yeah, I was trying to edge down to get like sensibly down this side because I could see a shot from the bottom part, and it was a bit wetter than I had anticipated, and the grass just gave way under my foot, and I hit the ground and started sliding. So it's amazing how time slows down in those situations, because it felt like I was sliding for about a minute and a half, but it was probably, I don't know, it was probably 10 seconds or less. But yeah, wow. It was that was pretty scary.
So other than slippery grass, what's the practice of photography taught you about nature?
It's given, I don't know whether this is a photography thing or it's an age thing, but I've got a much greater appreciation now for what nature brings us, and the fragility of it as well.
Yeah.
But as I say, I don't know whether that's an age thing or it's a photography thing, but that's, over the last few years, I've come to appreciate that much more than I had maybe in my younger days.
Mm-hmm. Do you do any printing of your work? And if so, do you send it out for printing, or do you try and print your own?
I have a printer here, which I bought, and I've tried at nauseum to get it right, and I really struggle, Grant. It is way more difficult than anybody ever gives it credit for. And certain shots I'll print and they'll come out and it'll be exactly what I see on the screen. And then others I'll print and it'll come out and I think it's completely different, like not just a little bit different. It'll be, instead of orange, like light oranges, it'll come out dark brown. And I'm thinking, I've got no idea what I've done differently to the last thing that I printed. So I am still persevering with it. But if on the odd occasions, if people do want stuff printed, I have a local printer that I use, and they're really good at turning things around, and the print quality is very good. So when people ask me for stuff, I tend to send it out to them, and I know I'm going to get something of good quality in a timely fashion, rather than me, spending 150 quid on ink trying to print one A4 print for somebody.
Fair enough. One of the things that a lot of people face is creative blocks and that challenging time when photography is just not working for you. Have you ever experienced that? And if so, how did you handle it?
I'm not sure I have yet. I'm sure I will, but because I'm only a couple of years into it, I still have the enthusiasm to get out there and to find new shots. I think of late I have become, because I have anything worth shooting in Northumberland, I've shot more than a couple of times now. So I have found myself itching to get a bit further afield, hence the Glencoe trip in November, and the desire to go over to the Lake District and that sort of thing. So I do want to look for some new places and some new type of shots. But I wouldn't necessarily say that's a block as such. It's just a desire to go a little bit further and do something a little bit different.
Yeah, fair enough. Where do you see photography's place in society?
Deep question. In society, I think it more so now, and I think it's changed over the years, but it's a record of a moment in time, which can be incredibly important. So whether that be a record of a landscape as it is today, or things like that aurora storm. So I think that was a 1 in 500 year solar storm or something crazy like that I read. That being documented is important, right? Because even 30 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to document that solar storm in the way that it's been documented now. And that was done all over the world. So I think that is really important. And I think that's at a kind of macro, at a micro level. I think people who are finding photography now are finding it more because of the experiences rather than the outcome or the output, the actual photograph. So I think people are using it as an excuse to get out into nature. A lot of people are using it as a kind of mindfulness or a relaxation tool or a way of reducing stress or whatever. So things like that, I think, are increasingly important for people. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. What about the future of photography? Where do you see it going?
That's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I've heard you ask that question a bunch of times, and people are very worried about AI in relation to photography, which I get. And I do think that whether we like it or not, at some point, it's probably going to render most photography from a commercial perspective. It's going to render most photography not useful anymore. But going back to what I just said, in terms of documenting an event or creating an experience, AI is never going to be able to do that. So I think there'll be more of a move towards things like experiential photography and things like the documentary value of photography, and the commercial side of it, things like headshots, things like product shots, things like stock images. All of that will go to AI, and it'll probably happen an awful lot faster than any of us would like it to happen. So I think it'll polarize. My bet would be that it'll polarize around those two things. It'll become more experiential in nature.
Mm. And AI as being the biggest challenge photographers face, or is there something else lurking in the background?
It probably is the biggest challenge, but I think a close second is just the sheer volume of quality photography that is out there, and trying to cut through some of that. If that's what people want to do. Some people might not want to cut through that and quite just to take a photograph and leave it on a hard drive somewhere, and that's cool. Yeah. That's absolutely fine. But I do think the proliferation of good quality photo. You go on Instagram now, and some of the shots on there are just like biblically good. They're just epic shots, and it's epic shot after epic shot. So finding something that is truly unique or different or inspiring or it is harder than it has ever been.
Absolutely.
So I think that is probably what maybe as big a challenge as AI, I think.
Yeah. I think what you just said about the ability to cut through, a lot of people do have that comparison envy or whatever you want to call it, where they're looking at somebody else's epic shot after epic shot. And I always like to use the analogy, you're watching people's highlight reels, not their blooper reel.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm only going to post my good shots. I'm not going to post my rubbish.
Of course. Yeah.
That said, I've also started to think a little bit differently about social media and how I use it. And one of the things that I'm really trying to do, aside from posting my best work, is also posting stuff that's different to what people are used to seeing from me, regardless of what that does to engagement and numbers, because I don't see the point in just constantly throwing up, oh, here's the best epic sunrise shot that I can conjure up.
Yeah.
when that's not necessarily where my interest happens to lie. And I've got very varied interests in the photography, and I think a lot of people that do that, I think, have personally a better rounded portfolio, or a better looking portfolio, because of the variation, because it's not all the same.
I completely agree with that. Yeah, I actually posted an image, was it last week, or I can't remember now, which I took about this time last year, and for me, it's one of my top 3 images I think I've ever taken, that I personally love. And I posted it a couple of times on social media, and it's absolutely flopped. Nobody else seems to value it, but to me, I love that image. I think it's, I look at it and I enjoy it. Yeah, and I'm absolutely fine with it. But I also, I don't know about you, when you post something on whatever on Instagram or something like that, and you get comments like, "You're so lucky to get that light," and the temptation for me to go back and say, "Yeah, the 73rd time I went looking for that light at that location, I was really lucky." The 72 times that I went there beforehand and got misery and lash and rain or whatever.
You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, and if you're not out there, you're not going to get the light.
Absolutely.
That's exactly it. Where do you see social media taking photography? I struggle with it sometimes. I've now settled back and said, okay, there's ways and means that I can generate engagement. Whether or not I choose to use them is neither here nor there. Where do you see it, and where do you see it playing a role in your own photography?
I think with social media, like for me, I made a decision last year to start posting something once a day. I post 1 shot a day. Some of them are stuff I've taken very recently and I've never posted before. Some of them might be shots that I took a year ago or whatever. So there's a mix, but I post something every day. But I came to the conclusion a little while ago that we're playing their game, right? They're not playing our game. So, and we're not. There's absolutely zero chance of me or you figuring out what works for Instagram versus Facebook or whatever. So I don't think it's healthy to try and do that. I post every day. I follow a relatively small number of people, and I engage with their work because I'm following them because I enjoy their work and I engage with their work. They engage with mine, and some of them do, some of them don't. And it just is what it is. I don't think it's going to be. I missed. I think at the beginning of the lockdown there was a big spike in. There's people who were in the social media world at that time got a lot of followers really quickly. I think now trying to build a following is just a fool's errand, to be honest. You know, if it happens and happens organically, brilliant. But it's not something that I think is healthy to start to try and chase down in 2024. I think it's just virtually impossible to manufacture.
I've in some of my socials, Twitter in particular, or X. I still can't really call it X. It just sounds weird. But yeah, Twitter in particular, I actually do quite a bit of follower grooming and take out bots, take out people that I know are inactive, because I can see the last time they posted was 2021. So there's not much point in having them as a follower, because
no, definitely not.
They're not looking, they're not doing anything. I've actually earlier this year I actually culled about 1,500 followers simply because
on X.
Simply because there was no value in having them in my thing. So actually getting rid of them and unfollowing those that I had, where you do mutual follows and so forth, because you get followed by another photographer and you say, oh, well, their stuff looks interesting, I'll follow them. And then they stop posting 12 months ago. And so there's not much point in following them and not much point in having them as a follower. So I actually went through a process of actually manually finding out whether or not people were following and then getting rid of them. And in a lot of ways, yes, it damaged numbers, but the numbers are meaningless anyway to me. It doesn't make much difference because
I
what
think
I'm
all you've got to
seeing,
do is look at the reach. So
that's it.
I post, if I look at the reach on some of the stuff I post, it's going to like 4% of the people that
Yeah,
follow me get to see it, and
yeah,
then like
this is it.
Facebook in particular has I I've lost the motivation to do much on Facebook because it's gone so low. It's you get to the point where you think there's just no point in putting anything on there
Yeah,
because the people who want to see it aren't going to see it anyway. So
no,
it's and I do think there's a lot of value these days in trying to direct people towards things like a mailing list where you're in control of being able to send stuff out to people. And if they have an interest in what you're doing, so like I've got a project where I'm trying to photograph all of the castles in Northumberland.
yep,
And the 70 castles I'm trying to photograph all of them. And there are people who are interested in following that particular project. And the best way to get that in front of them and so they can see the progress or they can see the latest image that you've taken is through a mailing list rather than through social
absolutely.
media. So I think nowadays, and it's not easy to do, but nowadays I think that's the best medium to try and reach people in a meaningful way rather than trying to hammer socials and trying to find a way to get to all of the followers because I just don't think it's possible anymore.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. Where are you on the spectrum of people that race home after a shoot and start editing to the ones that sit them on a hard drive for 6, 12, 18 months, 2 years, 5 years, and then come back to them
No,
and
I'm straight in.
go,
Yeah,
can't wait.
I literally walk through the door, put the bag down, unzip it, and get the camera out. Obviously, sometimes you can't do that, but
Yeah,
particularly if I've got something that I'm excited about, I want to see it, and I want to see it straight away. While the emotion, because I do think that if you're going to edit things in a certain way, you want the emotion of that to come across in the edit.
yeah,
And 6 months later, you're probably not going to be able to rekindle that same emotion that you had 45 minutes after you took the image. So I think coming back and getting straight into it whenever you can, when it's
sure.
practical, I'm all about that.
Yeah, cool. What's the best thing about being a photographer?
It's a good question. What's the best thing? I think just being able to capture things that make you capture things that you enjoy looking at. So that's all it is for me. I don't think it's any deeper than that. I like taking pretty pictures, Grant, and being able to look at them and enjoy them, and particularly things like the sunrises or the aurora, things that if I'd seen that with my eyes, that would be brilliant. But the
Yeah,
fact that I've now got
a record of it.
I've probably got about a gazillion images of the 10th of May, by the way. I haven't gone through them all. There's so many of them. But having that record of those things that I can look back on and I can remember
Yeah,
that because I haven't got a visual memory. So
yeah.
I really struggle to imagine images or recall images in my mind. So having that to be able to look at it is great for me.
Yeah. What's the worst thing about being a photographer?
What's the worst thing? I could say the cost, but I think I'm not sure there is many downsides. To be honest,
No, I
I'd
don't
struggle
mind
to answer that.
getting up at
Yeah,
stupid o'clock in summer for you guys. It must be a bit of a chore.
yeah, I don't mind when it gets into the peak of summer and to get anywhere for sunrise, it would need to start with a 3, and you start thinking that gets a bit silly. But other than that, and up this far north, our best sunrises are kind of autumn winter anyway. They're for me. That's when you get the best sunrises. You get the best cloud. You get the best light. The sun's further over in the sky. For our coastline on the north coast of England, in the winter, the sun rises further south, so it's just better quality sunrises. I'm happy to forego a couple of months in the winter, and I'll take the lie-ins when I get them.
Fair enough. What's the best and or worst piece of advice anyone's ever given you?
The best, well, it wasn't given to me directly, but one of the pieces of advice that I heard, which I thought was really insightful, and it stuck with me, and it's something I think about regularly, is take pictures about something rather than of something. And it's such a simple piece of advice, but if you think about it and you employ it as part of what you're doing, you come away with something quite significantly different than a snapshot of a location. And you try and bring different parts of the environment or the people or the history or whatever it might be, try and bring all of those into the image so that it becomes about the location or about the person or about the the thing that you're taking photographs of. So I think that's probably the best advice. I'm not sure I've been given any particularly bad advice, if I'm honest.
You're lucky.
Yeah. I'm sure I'll hear some at some point, but up until now, I can't. There's nothing sort of springs to mind.
Fair enough. Are there any photographers that you think I need to be talking to?
There's a lot, and I know everybody says there's a lot. There is a lot. He's not strictly a landscape. He's not a landscape photographer. He's more of a documentary photographer. But some of his advice is really good, and I think it'd be a great conversation. Sean Gallagher, the guy I mentioned earlier, who is the National Geographic photographer. Sean would be a brilliant conversation, I think, and might bring something a little bit different.
Not Liam's brother.
Not that I'm aware of. You never know. There may be some relation there. I've never heard, and so that bit of good advice that I heard was from James Popsis, and I've never heard an interview with James Popsis. I think he'd be a great interview, but I've never heard him on a podcast.
Yeah.
If you could get a hold of him, I think he would be really good. And then there's some local photographers to me that I think would be a good conversation. There's a guy called Callum Thompson. I think his handle is Adventure Cal. There's I'll think of some more, Grant, and I'll send you a few more names, but they would be 3 that are top of mind.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks, Jim. I've got one more question for you, and it's probably the most important one I can ask. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
Do you know what? I'll eat it. I wouldn't order it, but I'll eat it.
Fair enough. I'm much the same. It's been really wonderful getting to know you, Jim. Thanks for spending some time with us. Where can people find your work?
The best place would be the website, which is jimscottphotography.com. So there is another Jim Scott who's he's a very good architectural photographer in Scotland, and he is jimscottphotography.co.uk. So make sure it is .com. And all of the socials, Instagram, Twitter, are all Jim Scott Photo. So you can find me on the usual socials.
All right, brilliant. Thanks very much, Jim.
Cheers, Grant. Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at gruntswinburnphotography.com, along with prints, photography gear, and my 2025 calendar. I'm also on Vero, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting soon.